Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. I'm so excited for this conversation. We're going to talk about joy today with my friends, Akaya and Vinny. So we are so delighted to have so many people here. I think people are going to continue joining. Let us know who you are in the chat. I see people saying hello and where you're calling in from or anything else you want to say today. So we're going to have a wonderful lunch hour conversation. And we're excited to host this. I want to say thank you to our co-hosts, which are Women's Donor Network, Solidaire Network, CalNonprofits, and the Just Economy Institute. All participated in hosting this conversation, doing wonderful outreach, which is why we have almost, I think, more than 250 people signed up for today. So this is obviously a conversation that's resonating with a lot of people. We all need more joy in our life, and Akaya and Vinny are going to talk to us about how to center joy. The goal of our event is really to share with you resources from our colleagues and networks in the field, which is part of our Connect strategy. We have 3 strategies at Women's Foundation California: Invest, which is our grant-making strategy; Train, which is our policy institute; and Funders Policy Institute, where we train funders and advocates about the importance of public policy. And then Connect, which is where we, leverage our networks, open our networks, and support our partners in the field in their work. And so this is part of that. And it's an opportunity for us to bring our community and movement leaders together and to really bring more joy into movement space. And so for the next hour, we're going to be in conversation with Akaya and Vinny, who are just incredible people. And we will learn about how to embrace joy and leadership, help us to respond to the movement while creating conditions for abundance and well-being that we need in order to stay in this work for the long term. And we need to stay in this work for a long term because this work is, multi-generational. So we're going to start with I'm going to do some quick introductions, and then we will be in conversation, and then we'll make time at the end for comments and questions that you may have, and you can feel free to put those in the chat if you'd like, or we'll, as I said, open it up. So to begin with, thank you, Akaya and Vinny. I'm just delighted to be able to host this conversation. I want to thank our team at Women's Foundation California that worked so hard to pull this together with our partners. And I'll just introduce you briefly, because I think for this audience, you probably don't need much of an introduction, and especially that your legacy of work precedes you. So Akaya Windwood, you hopefully know, is an incredible advisor, trainer, consultant. She is on the faculty of the Just Economy Institute and a founder of New Universal, which is an incredible effort centering the human wisdom in the wisdom of brown women, which is so important. And then Vinny is the executive director of Solidaire Network. And we have all known each other now going on, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years. Vinny and I a little bit longer. And Vinny and I were in the Rockwood Leadership Institute, the Art of Philanthropic Leadership. I think it was 2008, but I'm not exactly sure. And Akaya was our trainer. And we had a lot of fun in those 5 days. And Vinny and I, at the end, Akaya called us the 2 rascals because I think we were mischievous, and we had a lot of fun together, and it bonded us. And so we stayed connected all these years later, often checking in as we were told to do by Akaya. We had to find a buddy or 2 to connect with, and we did that for years and still do. So Vinny is just returning from sabbatical. This is day 3. She came back to work on a Monday, despite my advice not to. So perhaps it gives you joy to come back on a Monday. But they say sabbatical, you really should come back on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, so it's not a shock to the system to work a full week. So if you do feel the joy depleting, I give you permission to not report to work on Thursday. So we're going to go right into this conversation, and hopefully you all have a copy of this book. And if you don't, we're going to let you know how you can get one after you at the end of this session. So to start with, I think I'll start with Akaya. And I just want to ask you to talk about how this book came to be, what inspired you to write it, and what inspired you to write it with Vinny.
Thank you. First of all, I just have to say how excited I am to be here and to see these names and picture people who are on. I'm having to put us on just the three of us because I'm so distracted by the beauty of everybody else who's here. So welcome. And maybe, because I like to do this now and again, we can all just take a collective breath. And notice you in this moment. Okay. You know, I didn't remember, Surina, that I called you rascals, but it was so appropriate. And the two of you have taken rascalness to new heights. I just want to name that because I was right then, and yeah, you're more rascally than ever. So what happened was Barrett Kohler, or Steve Piersante there, and Barrett Kohler had been kind of knocking at my door for a number of years about, are you going to write a book? And I'm like, no, thank you. And he'd show up every like 18 months and say, you going to write that book? And I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. Until, I don't know, 3 years ago, we were sitting in Rajasvini's garden, and it was just beautiful. And being silly as we often are, and I said, girl, let's write a book. And she said, okay. And then we thought, well, what are we going to write a book about? Because we didn't know. We said, well, let's write a book about being in the garden, because we get, both of us are gardeners, and we both derive so much joy from being in our gardens. And so we started to pull from pieces that we'd already written, but then engaged in conversation with Jennifer Lentford. I want to say thank you to for getting us organized. And it became a kind of an engagement over time for both of us, both past and then current, and evolved into what you have in front of you. We were going to call it In the Garden, our original, right? And then we realized, no, people were going to be looking for tips about what to do with aphids, and that's not what we know too much about. And so it became about leadership. And one of the things that I appreciate most was when we agreed to write this book about joy, we said, if there's a moment where this becomes less than joyous, we stop. And there were a couple bumps in the road, but they were bumps. They were not. And so this bringing this book forward has been truly a joyful thing, right? And that's made all the difference in the world. I realized that it wasn't that I didn't want to write a book; it's that I didn't want to write a book alone. So to have a partner to do it with, so much fun and so much joy.
And what a partner in Vinny. Vinny, so you did, I mean, I know it's hard to say no to Akaya. I don't think I've ever said no to Akaya. So, but you just said yes right away. You didn't have any reservations. What compelled you to say yes?
Yeah, no, exactly. Who says no to Akaya Windwood? Why would you be silly enough to do that? But also, the truth was we were in these really difficult pandemic times, and we were seeing people burn out. I was seeing people who I consider my teachers in this work, who I've learned movement work from, actually quitting in a way that I never imagined possible. And so we were really in a time where we were noticing folks struggling to stay in leadership roles for a number of reasons, that I'm so delighted actually is becoming more and more part of our conversations these days around resilience and sustainability and capacity and what are we trying to build, and so we would exchange notes about some of what we were noticing. And it just felt like, yeah, it was time to offer salve. It was time to offer some practices and also some of our own mistakes in our own leadership journey, so that folks don't feel so alone in the struggle.
Yeah. I love that there's so much of your stories in the book, though you weave them in intentionally without saying whose story is which. And of course, some of us can guess. And I think one time I guessed wrong because I asked Akaya, I said, "Oh, that was you." And she said, "No, it wasn't. That was Vinny." So anyway, I just love the way that the book is about stories and leads people through your own experiences. So Vinny, just as a follow-up, but Akaya and Vinny co-facilitate this ED Solidarity Circle that's part of the Solidaire Network, and I'm fortunate enough to participate in that. And I remember in one of the first sessions, we talked about our purpose. And when we were in Rockwood, we learned about defining our purpose, and I had a really tough time with it, as I think others did, because I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. And so when you shared your purpose in the Solidaire ED Solidarity Circle, I just thought how wonderful. And so I'll let you share it, but it's about joy and having making sure that every day is special. I'm not going to put, that's not how you described it, but so tell us about your purpose, Vinny, and then what's important about, well, before we talk about that, when did you first know that joy mattered to you?
Okay, great. Well, I was so I don't even know what I said because
I can tell you if you need a reminder.
Was it?
You said your purpose is to have a good time.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Yes. My purpose is still that. I think in the context of what's happening in 2023, it's slightly refined to say to create conditions and to nurture joy in myself so that I can be in this work for a lifetime. Right? And by this work, I don't mean philanthropy. I mean like work that advances us towards liberation in whatever form. So I would say, yes, to constantly nurture that feels right, and to have a blast while doing it. And I would say my first experience of joy, I'm so excited for this question because I want to tell you the truth about the first thought that came to me, and it was about my father. I think I was around 8 or 9, and we lived in Punjab, the border with Pakistan, and it was a really difficult time in India. There was a lot of violence against minority communities. My father worked for the Indian Railways, and he was committed to keeping the rails running, even though there was great threats to him as the head of this one division, going through contested territory. And he had pressures from the Indian government telling him, to route trains a particular way for political favors. And then he had pressures from the local separatist groups around routing trains another way. And he made a decision to keep the trains running to optimize working class, regular people's lives, which meant trains needed to go through regions that were contested. And when he did that, he really came under scrutiny, threats from every possible direction. And what I will never forget is my parents sitting me down and very joyfully saying to me, so we're going to keep the trains running and you get to be a part of this. And it took me years later to realize that the threats towards our family, towards me, towards my parents were very material, were real. But the joy with which my dad was like, I get to keep trains running. If anyone asks you what your dad does, that's what I do. It just has always reminded me that joy and bravery are, some things that go together. And there are days that I feel my joy depleting, and I remember that instance.
That's so beautiful. Akaya, how about you? When did you first know that joy mattered to you?
I was about the same age, maybe 8 or 9. And I don't know that I would have defined it as joy, but I remember standing in my backyard, looking up through the mulberry tree, which is in full leaf. And I could see the sky behind it. And it was just one of those glorious days. And for the first, I wasn't raised in any religion or any church, so I didn't have any that, spiritual experience. But in that moment, in looking up at the sky, I felt absolutely part of everything. And, I was actually standing in our sandbox, right? So I remember kind of sinking to my knees in the sandbox, looking up and feeling like this enormous part of all life for the first time. And it gave me such joy. And I remember I'm feeling it right now, right? It never left me. And it's always been a consistent reminder that I belong here. Everyone belongs here. It's the whole thing, not just me. So that's when I can remember first being very aware of joy. Again, at the time, I don't think I had that language, but as I look back on it, that's exactly what. And it literally brought me to my knees.
Amazing. So both of you have talked about, Vinny, you said joy and courage go together. And I think joy and grief can go together. And in particular, in this moment, this week, last week, last year, the last few years, the work that we are all doing, but we're surrounded by so much tragedy, and we're continuing to hold so much grief with the gun violence that we've seen against our communities, the police violence against our communities. So talk a little bit about, how do you hold joy and grief and sorrow together? Can they be held together?
Okay, I'll start. When I feel joyful, I feel it in my body. And I want to make a distinction between joy and happiness, right? Because I can become happy if I read a happy story, right? My happiness is often in reaction to what's going on around me, right? So I see people being, laughing, and I can say, tell a story about, those are happy people. It makes me happy. Joy, but it's something that's more in my mind as opposed to my body, which feels when I'm joyful, like I said, it knocks me to my knees sometimes, right? Similarly, grief is body-centered. If we allow ourselves to feel it, it will knock us to our knees, right? It's not, and it's not necessarily about what's going on out there. It's how my body is reacting to a loss or something that is unexpected. And that's different than sadness, because I can become sad when I read a sad story, right? But I'm not going to experience grief. So we're looking at the place in where grief and joy is body-centered, as opposed to a reaction to something that might be told to us, or a story about what might be told to us. And since they sit in our bodies, or are located in our bodies, or so we believe, that one can be in a state of grief and experience amazing joy. I remember as my mother was dying, there was huge grief among us. It was 6 weeks from diagnosis to her going. And in those 6 weeks, we were all grieving because, you know, everybody came in, and at the same time, because we all came in and shared the silly stories, and there was huge laughter. And so feeling that laughter and joy and grief at the same time, and it literally was at the same time. So they sit, they're sisters, they're kin, cousins, let's say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I had, similar experience when in death, whether it was my father, my mother, my sister a couple years ago. And so there's grief, but in that grief, you find joy. And I was really struck with that a few years ago because my sister died. And then a month or so later, our dog Rosie, we had to put her down. And I was struck by these sort of dichotomies of like, in grief, there is joy, in loss, there is liberation. And with all, love to Rosie, but we were able to go places after she died. And so there was kind of a freedom of just because she needed us to stay home together all the time, which was wonderful for her during COVID. But, so there was, we can feel loss and at the same time liberation. We can feel grief and at the same time joy. And then similar with bravery, I want to go back to that, Vinny, and ask you a question that you ask us and you ask in the book. So I want you to tell about a time that you were brave and that bravery set you free. And what does bravery and courage have to do with leading with joy?
I love it. Maybe it's because I'm just coming off of sabbatical where I spent 6 weeks in India, where I was raised, and did some ancestral intergenerational healing, I feel. So these things are very present for me. But the one time where I was really brave that I think about is when I came out to my family in my early 20s. It was a time where there weren't a whole lot of out queer folks that I knew in India. And I did rural work in India, and I decided that would be a great time to come out to my family. But one of the things that set me free is until then, I always felt like I was leading a duplicative life, that there was a part of me that wasn't being honest with my loved ones, and I felt in disarray about it internally, and that affected my capacity to authentically do this rural community work that I was doing, and it got in the way of me building relationships with people because I was always a little bit in fear of being found out. But then going through that process, and it was not a pleasant process, my bravery did not lead to rainbows. It led to a lot of difficulty with my family, including a period of being disowned and lots of anger and grief and all of that. But what it allowed me to learn at a very young age is how to assert my truth and to lead from a place of compassion, even with the folks that couldn't get on board right away. And, I'll never forget my mom's first reaction when I came out to her was really beautiful. She said, "Oh, it's in our scriptures, it's in our history, it's part of our culture. I'm not worried about there being anything wrong with you. I just worry about your safety." And that was a really helpful reaction. That was not everyone else's reaction in the family. But this idea of, when people wouldn't get it, I would remind myself that they cared for my safety. They cared for me to live a long time and thrive. And they didn't know that it was possible to live this way and to be self-determined. And in some ways, it allowed me to then continue to do a bunch of rural work and work that was outside of, where it was easy to be queer, I would say, which has led me to having a life of just deep lessons I have learned from rural leaders all over the world. And I think it set me free to then recognize and honor people for their truth telling, even though it may not always be what I want to hear. especially as an organizational leader.
We'll get back to that about leading with joy in an organization. But for Akaya, you've talked about where joy can lead us in doing movement work. Why is joy so important, and where can it lead us?
Back toward the center, toward ourselves, toward one another. You know, the work of transformation is hard work. Let's just be real about that. Where many of us are in responding to toxic systems, trying to tear things down so that something new can be created. We are in a time where it's 24/7 news about who's killing whom and what that looks like. And so to practice joy is, we believe, really transgressive, because the last thing, when I think about who I could control, let's say I wanted to control a group of people. I can control a group of scared people. I can control a group of despairing people. But if people are joyous, I don't even know where to start. So I think that control, despair, and there's no right or wrong here. Please don't mishear any of that. Because there are moments when I am in despair, let me be real. But I can allow myself to be in those moments of despair, because I also know that this too shall pass. And that by practicing joy, I spend much more time in a place of joy, and thereby I'm less able to be caught in the story of the moment. Does this make sense? One of the tools of oppression is fear. And it is despair. And but our ancestors didn't survive because they spent their lives in fear. They survived because enough of them kept their hopes alive for something new, for something joyful, that there would be a generation of us who can choose joy. And I feel like my responsibility to my ancestors, since I am that generation that can choose to practice joy, that to me feels like a responsibility I have to my ancestors. And where does it lead us? To this conversation, right? I mean, seriously, this is how I spend my time these days, talking to rascally women about joy. How my mother could never have imagined that, never, let alone her mother, or their mother, or my father's, or any of those, so it's our birthright. I believe that joy is a birthright, and it gets systematically degraded from us when we're children. So to reclaim that and practice it, I believe that it really is a leadership responsibility to cultivate or create the conditions whereby joy might be possible.
How do you practice joy? What for some of us, I mean, I really center it every day myself. And I think the practice of it shows up in different ways. Lately, it's finding joy in saying no to things sometimes, because I really check in with myself and say, is this something I really want to do? And there's examples of that in your book, where you at first, you get an invitation to do something, you think, oh wow, that's amazing that they're choosing me, and then but I don't think I want to do that. So for those of us who on this call might have trouble practicing joy or centering joy, talk to us a little bit about how you practice joy. How do you center it, and what advice or guidance do you have for others to find and lead with joy? So I'm going to start again with Akaya, but I want to hear, Vinny, your answer to this as well.
Yeah. It's a practice. and I have to practice it, right? Because again, I want to come back to the systems that are not interested in me being joyful or any of us being joyful, right? But so I have some practices. I can go out in my garden. I go out to the hills, and I can, right now the mushrooms are like growing everywhere. And so I take deep delight in the mycelial network. And so when I see mushrooms, I get a little hit of joy. Or my orange tree, or there's a lot of things that if I allow myself to remember to attend to it, right, then I have access to joy most of the time. But I have to remind myself, oh, let me attend to what's happening here. Oh, look, the daffodils are about to bloom in the front yard. There's about maybe a day and a half, and they're just going to go. And so I've been watching them like a little hummingbird over them, going, go ahead, bloom. And I have to take 10 steps outside. So it's not like I have to go anywhere. The trick is to remember to look for it. Right?
Exactly. That reminded me of something, and then I forgot. So I think I will just go to you, Vinny.
And if you remember it, please share. There are two things that help me practice joy these days. One is community, always. And, I was going to say, one of the reasons I came back on Monday is there was a really fantastic event last night related with Solidaire's grantee partners that I just did not want to miss. And my partner commented last night that I was giddy in a way that she hadn't seen me in a while. And I was literally giddy because I was like so happy to connect with so many people and talk political strategy. It's like knowing what gives you joy. I'm a nerd. What can I say? Political strategy gives me joy these days, but also being in community with people and just seeing people and being able to hug people after so long and being able to share a bite and a drink. It's like really nurturing my soul at the deepest level, and I need that so much. So I'm saying yes to it and making space for it. At the same time, I have a really monastic routine. I go to bed at the same time. I wake up early. I make a lot of time to be with myself quietly in the morning before my day begins. And so getting to bed early and waking up early and having hours of time to do my little practices feels like a really critical source of joy. And of course, I try with each year to be less rigid around it, at the same time honoring it. So of course, last night was a late night and it was fine. Today we woke up a little late, and today got the day started a little late, and today didn't get to do all 5 practices, only 1. It's all good. Being flexible about it, but I think it's the balance of that. It's like being in community, letting the source of people nurture me, but also having my time to be with myself.
Yeah. I remembered what I was going to say, which is basically that, joy looks different for everybody. And what brings you joy is not something that might bring me joy. So part of centering joy, I think, is noticing, taking the time to notice, oh, this is something that brings me joy. And so I'm trying to get in the practice of, in working with our team to ask, and, Akaya, you said earlier how joy is embodied. It's part of we have a physical kind of response to it. And so I think of that in relation to energy. And so, I ask myself, I notice in myself, well, what is bringing me energy? What is bringing me joy? And then I ask myself also, what is depleting me? What are the things that I don't really want to be doing? And that doesn't mean that, sometimes we have to do the things that we don't want to do, but just to know that this is something that actually depletes my energy. So maybe I need to go towards something that fills me back up. But also, I learned this when Akaya, you were co-facilitating the Just Economy Institute, the Our Money Ourselves conversation. And one of the speakers spoke about in her style of leadership, she, and this is where I got it from, and I try to practice it, asks her team, what brings you joy? What energizes you? Let's focus on that, because maybe the things that are depleting you might bring somebody else joy. And so there's a way of organizing the work so that it really centers joy. So this brings me to the organizational question, is what does leading with joy look like within organizations? And I'll start with you, Vinny, and then I'm sure, Akaya, you have plenty to say about this too, in terms of the work that you do with people who lead organizations, and you yourself having previously led Rockwood. So Vinny, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you spoke to this, Surina. The act of paying attention as leaders cannot be overstated. We can get fixated as leaders, and I have certainly done this part of it myself, on deliverables, on outcomes, on goals, on our setup agenda. We forget to notice the state of being of our people that are doing the work, that are executing the work. And, you know, for those of us that run much more than organizations, networks and alliances where we have multiple stakeholders, I've got my staff, but I also have members of Solidaire, also have partners of Solidaire, right? There's multiple people that we have to attune to, that we have to attend to, and see what's the state of their being. Are we becoming somewhat, you know, like not listening to the messages that are coming our way? Are we getting so fixated on our own agenda that we're not making pivots when they're necessary? And I feel like the last 3 years has been a huge lesson in pivoting, taking a collective bereavement leave as a staff team, because it was the height of the pandemic and every single person had not one or two, but multiple losses in their family. How could we possibly continue to work business as usual when that was what was happening in people's lives? And so we had to take a pause. We ourselves lost 2 colleagues at Solidaire, both incredible fighters for justice. And we had to take a moment to actually process that loss and make sense of it, and to honor them in the way that not only our hearts wanted, but also how they would have wished to be honored in this work, right? And so to make time to do that in a way that connected us deeper as a team, and kept us from allowing grief to turn into rage and then turn into infighting, which often happens in our organizations. So it's like the attunement piece is really critical, I feel, for leaders, you know. And I think some of us can hear that and feel like, oh my gosh, you're adding more to my plate now. Like, as a leader, I now also have to like tap into what everyone's feeling. That's not my point. My point is that if we want our work to feel joyful, which leads to greater, in my opinion, productivity and greater strategic work and greater impact in the world, then we have to actually take time to notice the state of being and to make the shifts that are necessary internally. And as executive leaders, we're certainly responsible for sending the messages around what kind of a culture we're creating. You know, I have noticed in my own leadership, when I am fried and not connecting to the sources of joy in my own life, I can be shorthanded. I can be abrupt. I can like respond unskillfully to something that triggers me. And that is the perfect time for me to notice, oh, maybe I actually need to rest more. Maybe I need to take a walk. Maybe I need to eat better food. You know, it's like small shifts in my own day, in my own attunement to myself, that allows for me to lead in a way that doesn't cause harm.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you as a follow-up, Vinny, you said something to me a while back. I can't remember if it was one of our group sessions but you said you're a very different leader now than you were when you were leading Thousand Currents. So can you just say a little bit about that?
You know, I was a first-time executive director, and I was driven so much by wanting to prove myself. In my early days, I wanted to, Thousand Currents, which used to be IDEX. Hi, Yael. who was my predecessor there. It was an organization that was struggling, and it had a huge fundraising goals. And as a young ED, I felt like my entire self-worth was sort of caught up in how successfully I helped this organization grow. And so I was so good at grinding. I found great joy in the work, don't get me wrong. It was like inspiring to serve all these incredible social movements in the global South and learn from all these incredible leaders who are our partners. And I think so much of what drove me also was like, I could not imagine failing. I think now I'm much better at failing. I'm also much better at creating space for other leaders to shine, because it's actually not about me anymore. And I'm really clear about that. It's very different to feel like I'm here to enable and support and facilitate and create the right conditions and set strategy in motion collectively with a bunch of really brilliant people, but also it's not just about me. And that's a completely different orientation that allows, I'm noticing my colleagues' leadership just like exponentially growing and shining because they have room, to experiment and play and sometimes even be in the front, which is really terrific. I also felt like back in the day, we had no permission to not be, as executive directors, the primary ambassador for the organization. The world has changed. There's so many capable young leaders that are able to play that role. So it doesn't have to center only on us. And I'm delighted to have a break from doing the philanthropy circuit, and make more room for colleagues who are really hungry to do it and actually are better at it.
Yeah, 100%. Akaya, I want to go to you. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge, thank you to all of you who are posting in the chat. You're posting some wonderful stuff. And I encourage you now to think about, other comments that you want to share, questions that you might have. I will turn to Akaya, and then I might have one more question. And then we want to open it up. We want to hear from maybe not all 117 of you, but some of you. So Akaya, talk to us about how do we continue to find joy within organizations?
All right, let me start by saying if I'm running an organization, it is not my responsibility to make people feel joyous. That is not what we are saying at all. Because what our responsibility is to create the conditions by which joy is possible, right? Because if I felt like, oh, Rajasvini's joy is my responsibility, she's not, I'd probably be okay with that because she's generally joyful, but I can't be responsible for somebody else's joy. That said, I want to come back to something you said earlier, Surina, which is about my language is what fills me up and what drains me. And I can notice pretty quickly, I can tell when my ego says, oh, look, here's an opportunity. I should take it and then if I take 2 more minutes and go, I don't want to do that. I can pretty quickly assess, oh, my ego's excited and my spirit is not. So let me then say no in a joyful way, right? But that's true on an individual level. I think it's also true organizational. I wonder if everybody who's on this call, who's in an organization, and I know there's a lot of you, what if you were to go back to your offices, as it were, your workplaces, and ask, of all the things we're up to, who's still excited about this? Where is the passion for this? Let's do a quick, does this particular thing that we said we'd do, does it fill us up? Does it drain us? And just get a temperature check on all that you're doing, because I can imagine that there are things that an organization is doing because they've always done it and there's money for it that nobody really has any passion for anymore. So might be a hard thing to name, but if nobody's passionate about something, if not blowing people's dress up, stop. And similarly, to ask, what is it that's we're totally excited about here, where there's a lot of passion, it fills us up as individuals and as an organization. And what else might we want to really be doing that we just haven't named yet? The reason why this is so important, because imagine if the organizations that are supporting our social transformation and racial justice and all the justice stuff, all the stuff we're working on, imagine if they were filled with joyful people doing things that everybody wanted to do, and that the drudgery was minimized, or as Rajasvini says, the grinding is minimized. Now, there's some things I'm not good at, I'm just not good at, and I hate it, like managing details, or having to figure out something remotely around tech in the 21st century. I'm terrible at it, right? It gives me no joy. But there are people for whom that just makes them like go into happy land. So let me step away from that stuff and support those folks where they go, oh yeah, bring me a detail, and make it even micro detailed. Meanwhile, my hair's on fire. Let's get clear about because it doesn't serve anybody for me to be sitting here trying to figure out how to open a Google document, which I'm proud to say I have never created a Google document in my entire life. I'm 66. I plan to live for 25 at least more years, and I plan to never create a Google document. But that's not me. Ms. Rajasvini, girl, can open, close, turn around, make it make special noises and all the things, and I'm like, oh, right. But she likes that kind of stuff. So let's ask ourselves as organizational leaders, is there real passion for what we're doing? And if not, make a different choice. And I'm willing to bet that the joy factor in your organizations will be magnified.
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions that have come through the chat. I don't think you can see them all because we're monitoring them I don't know where they're coming through in the Q&A or something, but my colleague Kamika has sent me a bunch. So I'm going to turn to those so that we can bring in our people to this conversation, and encourage you also, I'll turn on the participants. So if somebody wants to raise their hand, I'll try to keep a lookout for that, and you could also bring your voice into the conversation. But before I do that, I want to just leave, everybody with this question. And it's a question that Akaya and Vinny ask. I think the first time I heard it was at the Our Money Ourselves conversation, which is and to preface it with to say that I believe that joy can accelerate the change that we're working towards. It can happen faster if we center joy. It can spread further if we center joy. So if that hypothesis is true, then this question I want just everybody to sit with, and it's important. So if the world that we're working to create happens in our lifetime, let's say in 2 years or 3 years, what would you shift or change next week? I just love that question. And so I want everybody to think about that. And Akaya and Vinny, if you want to answer that as we move forward into this Q&A and comment time, that would be great. So let me just go through some of these questions. The first one, and I don't know who is asking these, I just have the questions. I'm curious about ethical alignment. How have the authors continued to lead with joy, even working if you work within toxic or violent spaces? So this is an important question because we have probably many of us, if not all of us, seen organizations implode in the last few years. We've seen leaders who have been attacked from within and just left, burned out. Don't want to take this. It's not bringing me joy anymore. I'm done. So, maybe we don't work within toxic workplaces, but what advice do you have? How can you center joy if you're working in a toxic or violent environment?
Go ahead, Akaya.
You go.
Okay. Well, I will say a couple of things about this, right? I mean, one, if you are truly being harmed, and if you're experiencing what feels like much more than discomfort, it's like it is not healthy. It is time to leave. We are not big believers in murdering yourself. It is not worth it. Your gifts, your skills, your talents, your beauty is needed elsewhere. This is not the place. Keep it moving. That is a big belief. But, sometimes I think back to my own career, and sometimes I was really uncomfortable and I wanted to externalize my discomfort. And I needed to stay because there was something for me to learn. And almost every time I needed to stay and learn, it had something to do with understanding how to lead, how to understand the deeper context. I think back to the time I used to work for a youth serving organization. The trauma that was all around me was in reaction to what our young people of color were experiencing on the streets. And as the program director, what I realized was my reactivity was because I sometimes felt so helpless in face of this context of great violence against Black and brown youth in this country. And part of me staying was helping create for my youth workers better conditions to debrief, to process, to slow down, to pause, to support each other, to be less driven by churning out, serving youth all day and then churning out grant reports at night, but to actually create more capacity for people to do what they were best at and help the organization transform itself to not put so much pressure on its frontline workers. And I, as a program director, could be really useful in creating those systems and structures. But I had to work through my own deep discomfort with folks around me really struggling and myself struggling. And so, there are circumstances that give us room to grow as leaders, but we have to make an honest assessment of it. And even after I did that, there were some things that just didn't change, that were taking a toll on my health and well-being and making it impossible for me to be effective. For example, I was being asked to make compromises on things that were felt unethical. And so I knew that was time for me to go. But I'm learning. I didn't leave skillfully then, but I'm learning that leaving skillfully is really important. I'm leaving a few boards, and I'm learning to leave with honest, thoughtful, kind feedback. Let me leave in a way that's not just about disappearing into the night, but actually in a way that allows organizations to keep growing and learning.
Thank you. Akaya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do.
I know you do.
This is really important question. One, if there is violence where you work and you then leave. And again, I think it's important to talk with folks. Okay, so let's start there. It's hard for me to discern by myself. I can come to certain amounts of, this is how I feel right now. But I'm going to be so much wiser if I talk with you, Surina. If I say, girl, I need walk me down off this wall, because I am about to get really ugly up in here. And you can say, and have said, okay, well, what's really going on? And then I can take a breath and go, oh, well, it feels like this, la, 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 la. And when I can take a breath and get back to center, then with help, I can be much more discerning about the circumstances under which I currently am, right? So that's important that we not try to do this in isolation, that we talk about it. It's also important that we honor our boundaries and go, I mean, I'm totally with you, Rajasvini. The kinds of stuff I would put up with when I was a young leader were things that I needed to learn about, right? Were they comfortable? No. Did I make a lot of mistakes? Without a doubt. I, was an executive director for the first time back in the early 90s. And I said, I will never do this again, ever in my life, ever, ever, ever. Did I learn a lot? Absolutely. Did I eventually become president of an organization many years later? I did. And the reason why I was a good leader later was because I had the experience of being in a really toxic situation earlier, and I didn't want to replicate that. But I needed people around me to be able to talk things through with, so that I could not just get my feelings hurt and decide it's toxic here. And this is an important nuance. We have language out in the world like microaggression, right? Or various things. And I think there's some assumption that we will never, if there's a microaggression or a macroaggression, that somehow or other, everything's wrong. We have to stop everything. And so I've seen organizations kind of implode around that kind of thing, which is really different than saying, what kind of culture do we want to have here? It's not that the microaggressions or the aggressions won't happen. It's how do we handle them? How do we keep ourselves in relationship when these things come up, and they inevitably will? So it's about not giving up on each other and honestly assessing if someplace is toxic for you, please leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so happy because at Women's Foundation California, joy is a value that we hold. And it's one that kind of bubbled up organically. It's not in our list of values when we went through our values like exercise, but it's there now. And if you're on our email list or you see any of the things that we're putting out, joy is very central to the work that we do and to our organizational culture. And it makes me so happy because when we did our organizational values, and it was, the staff was different at that time, I wanted to have joy there, and it got voted down. And I thought, in a way, isn't all the work that we're doing about, if you boil it down to sort of the core of what we're trying to do, it's to care for our loved ones and to live joyfully. And then in another organization that I was on the board of, we went through a values exercise. And again, I brought up joy, and people felt it was too frivolous, that the work is too serious, that we can't hold joy. And it literally killed my joy in the moment. And so I'm just so happy that sort of tide is shifting, I hope, in the sectors that we work in. Okay, I want to go to some more questions. There's 3 that have come up in the chat that I want to bring out. So the first one I saw was from Jennifer Haas, who asks, what work are you doing to share the message of this book with movement leaders and other social justice leaders? How can funders consider joy and well-being in grant making and relationships with grantees? So Vinny, I'm going to ask you first, given that this is partly a funder philanthropy question.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. We are so thrilled that people have picked up the book and are hosting study sessions using the discussion guide. Coaches and trainers within the movement ecosystem are using the book as a starting off point to help support people's practices. And so there's a lot happening around that. That's really exciting. Some of it, Akaya and I get to anchor, but part of the joy of writing this book is some of it is happening without us. And people just tell us that they did it, and it's really cool. One of the most recent report backs is from a group of Latinx movement leaders in Texas doing electoral work, who are hosting a monthly study cycle, because can you imagine how they're feeling after 2022? But they want to be in the struggle a long time, and they want to come anew for 2024. And so they're using this as a way to re-energize, and it's really moving for us. And many such examples. And in terms of philanthropy, one of the surest way in which we can spark more joy is to make multi-year general operating support grants. Let us do it. We encourage everyone in Solidaire to do it. I encourage all my colleagues on this call to do it. We have heard it over and over again. Solidaire even asked our grantee partners what would help them feel more joyful in their work. And they said multi-year commitments, especially when doing this hard work of grassroots organizing and movement building and healing from the Trump era and all of that. We really need multi-year support that we don't have to beg and borrow and steal for. And we just need it to come in. And that knowing that it's there allows us to invest in culture change, into better benefits for our staff and our volunteers, and helps us grow a bigger base.
Great. Akaya, anything to add?
Yeah, I just had a thought for the first time, so I don't know how I feel about it, and you can all go, no, don't have that thought ever again, okay? But one of the things I'm looking to increase, or wanting us to increase in our social movements, is generosity, right? Because I really believe that if we stop competing for resources and fame and all the things, then we could be much more joyful and productive. What if funders, philanthropy, were to say, here's your multi-year, use this money as you see fit, and who else should we support? So that if I'm Rockwood and I say, oh, thank you so much for this support, you know who else you also want to think about? Leader Spring. And so that it gives the message out there that we're in this together, and we can spread this around, and we don't have to compete for all the things, right? I just had a thought about that. I bet that would be a joyful conversation.
Absolutely.
And I want to give wait a minute, before we go, Surina, I want to give you a little props here, because I was recently with your staff in your last little staff retreat, and you do have joyful people. The joy was palpable. When I walked in the room and I saw the work product, the notes on the wall, and could feel the room, people were connected and joyful. So whatever you're doing it well.
Thank you. And that goes right back out to our team, because joy, as you said, I can't create the conditions of joy. I can practice it, and I can ask others about how they're feeling energized, what's bringing them energy, what's bringing them joy. But it's really it's a collective effort in our case, and it's very intentional. And I'm very grateful for that. So there's a question from Anitra, but before I move on to that, I'm going to take Yael's question, because it's related to getting the book out there. Is anybody going to be publishing this book in Spanish? Because there are plenty of kick-ass leaders who would appreciate it, and probably in many other languages too. What's your publisher going to get it out there in other languages?
We will bring that back to them.
Okay.
We have no control over this. That's one of the things we've learned as authors, how little control we have on most things, unless we have great relationships like with you all. And but we'll bring it back. Thank you. It's a great idea.
Great. Okay, so there's a question from Anitra, which is pretty heavy. Is that, how have you created a healthy relationship with joy and failure? So Vinny, you talked about failure. Anitra says, as a Black woman, I've been conditioned to feel like the stakes are so high for the communities I care about, so there is not a lot of room for failure. How have you improved your relationship with failure?
Let me take this one first. Okay, first of all, let us get clear that who are we failing? Well, let's be clear about what failure is, because if I define failure as an inability to meet the expectations of white supremacist patriarchy, then bring on failure. Bring it on, because that's not I'm not interested in that anymore. And one of the challenges we have, particularly as Black women, women of color, is that we're up against these horrific expectations that have nothing to do with who we are fundamentally. So let's all start from a place of every human is worthy the moment we get on the planet. And that we don't have to prove our worthiness to anyone. Let's start there. Which puts us back in a place, puts us in a seat of power. If I never feel like I have to prove myself to anybody ever again, imagine that. And that then it frees us up to do the work that's ours to do and only do that work. So failure, yeah, I've failed. I guess the only way I could truly fail is if I made a bunch of mistakes and didn't clean them up, or didn't do my part to apologize when I step on things. Then that's a failure. Have there been many times when I had an expectation that I was going to do X, Y, and Z and it didn't happen? Yeah, that happens. But that doesn't mean I'm a failure. So I think we really need to redefine what failure means, starting from a place of we are all worthy to be alive.
Yeah. Vinny, anything to add? I mean, I think this goes back to in loss, there's liberation, and joy, in grief, there's joy. In failure, there's certainly learning. I mean, if we learn from our failures, then that actually is very powerful. Sometimes we have to fail to find the right way. Okay, so now we have a question from Ephraim. How can we effectively invite male identifying leaders, particularly straight men, to learn about the benefits of joyful leadership? Ephraim wants to help male identifying folk move from constant anger and frustration to joy. I see women and queer leaders doing their work, but I don't really see men as a group doing the same. Any suggestions of groups of male identifying folk that I can connect with are appreciated. Who would like to take that?
I shared a little bit, I think one of the great joys of this book is that we're getting to talk to audiences we don't usually in our line of work. And we have both been so moved. We started with men in the business sector reaching out to us to feature us on their podcasts. And our first reaction, which is really interesting to note, was like, why? What does this white dude even want with us? And then we had to pause and be like, oh, wait, this is interesting. They read the book. They want to be in a conversation about it. And they've been some delightful conversations we've been part of. And it's given me a lot of hope. I think Akaya will agree. It's given us a lot of hope to see how in every sector there's some important shifts happening and people are reckoning, sometimes by their own goodness, but often because of pressure from below on transforming the ways in which they work and the way they run their companies. And they want to engage with this material, even though it's, because of our experience, our stories are from the social sector. And so I'm feeling strangely optimistic and hopeful. One of my wounds is around Indian patriarchy in particular. And even being in India and watching the reception to this book and how many young men wanted to engage in conversation about how to be better people-centered leaders, how to create more room for women in leadership and gender non-binary people in leadership. It was really moving to me. So I think we find ourselves in a very developmental moment where I think the more of these conversations, each of us who has the appetite for it can engage, some transformative things are brewing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we are coming to time. And before we close, I just want to encourage, if you haven't bought this book, go and buy it. Kamika and our team, can you just list the link again in the chat so that folks know how to get this book? It makes a wonderful gift. And speaking of organizational leadership, we bought a copy for every one of our staff and our board. And it makes wonderful gifts if you're a funder. It's a wonderful gift for organizations. There's a lot in here. The book is literally a gift to the movement. And so I want to thank you, Akaya and Vinny, for writing it, for sharing your wisdom with all of us. And just want to ask you if you have any last words to share before we close.
You are a gift, Surina Khan. Thank you for your leadership. You're a gift, Women's Foundation of California and your community. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, look for moments of ease. Really look for moments of ease, particularly now. So that's a step toward joy. And Surina, I want to thank you again. And Rajasvini, every day I think, oh, I could not love her more. And I'm always wrong. Because every day I love you more. So
Same here. Thank you, Akaya.
That is such a sweet note to end on. So I just want to say thank you all again for being here. We had, I think, more than 100 people. Some people have had to fall, leave a little bit early. But I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to especially thank the Women's Foundation California team who got us all here. These things don't just happen. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, and there's a lot of work in managing the technology. So thanks to our team at Women's Foundation California, and also again to our co-hosts, the Women's Donor Network, Solidaire Network, CalNonprofits, and the Just Economy Institute. Thank you all so much.